What was this drug? I couldn't stay messy on it. I hadn't had a cigarette in 6 hours, hadn't eaten. So, abstemious and tidy? What was this? A drug for people who wanted to be more anal retentive? I wasn't high, wasn't wired, just clear. I knew what I needed to do and how to do it.
The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vitruvian Man podcast. I'm your host, Zach Shankin, and this week I want to talk about how to tackle a task list that is seemingly overwhelming, tips for productivity, the importance of routine setting, and mental models and frameworks for lowering stress and increasing output. Basically, this episode, the topic of this episode comes to us from a friend of mine, Grace, so you can blame her for my ramblings this week, but I was kind of asking her what she wanted to hear / what I should talk about, and so she suggested kind of this idea of, the way she phrased it was closing the tabs, or the prompt she gave me was like closing the tabs in your mind. And it got me to thinking more broadly on how you can be more productive and how to decrease anxiety. Because I think a huge barrier oftentimes to being productive is getting trapped in the anxiety of the tasks that we have to do. And it definitely ties into what she was describing with like the closing the tabs, because everyone knows about like you have a bunch of windows open on your computer. It's a mess. It's hard to see what you should tackle first or which ones need to be closed, which ones need to be left open. And I think very much the broader tasks of life can be viewed similarly. So excellent prompt from her, and I guess we can dive in. I understand and obviously have experienced, just like anyone else, that life can be super hard, overwhelming, and stressful. And as people like myself and like yourself that aspire to some level of greatness, and whatever that greatness is for you, you'll oftentimes be taking on more than one thing at once. And without the proper mental frames, productivity tools in place, it can feel like stacking a pile higher and higher in your arms without the ability to reorganize the things in that pile. So imagine for a second, we can use this analogy. Imagine I ask you to help me carry some stuff into my apartment from my car. So you come along, we get to the back of the car, open up the trunk, and I hand you a flat tray upon which we can stack some of the stuff that I need to bring in, right? So you grab the tray, hold on to it, no problem. It's balanced, it has handles, it's flat, it's ideal. So we begin to stack stuff off, and at first it's really easy, right? Like I just stack a few books and my laptop. No problem. They're all flat. They stack well. They organize well. This wouldn't be anything challenging for you to handle. But, you know, I'm a person, I'm a one-trip warrior with groceries and all that stuff, so I want to send you in with as much as possible. So I continue to add things to that list, or that pile. And on top of it, now we start stacking some odd-shaped objects, you know, desk lamp, a box of cables, computer monitor, kitchen utensils, you name it. And now things are getting pretty dicey for you to balance and hold and support. Not only is it getting heavier just because of the objective weight of everything, but they're not shaped well, so you're kind of having to do a bit of a balancing act. And short of really organizing those things really well, like if we were just to stack the first thing that came to my hand on top of each other, it would quickly either fall out of your hands, or you would at least lose, the whole tray would fall, or you would lose at least one thing from that. It wouldn't really make any sense at all to not take the time as I'm piling it on and preparing to give it to you to organize it in the best way, so that, you know, the heaviest things are at the bottom. We organize it based on size, shape, and whatever, so that we can have a stack that is both stable and balanced. And you can think of your life as that stack. You continue to add things to your plate, which you should. I think we are capable often of a lot more than we tend to aspire towards. I think we have a capacity to be extremely great and live an extremely fulfilled and very busy life. It's important that as we add these tasks and the things that we're doing to our life, that with those things comes the intention of how we add them in. When do we accomplish them? How do they fit into this kind of concert of all the other things that we were already doing the non-negotiable stuff. Where can we remove things that we are no longer either serving us or just kind of wasteful of our time, and also distractory towards the things we really want to put time towards. So when you go to add stuff to your life, think about adding it the right way, not just, oh, I want to throw this on top of the tray and hope it makes it to the apartment. No, like that wouldn't make sense. You have to fit things in where they work and only where they work in regards to the things that you can't move around. And ultimately that will allow you to transport through life and to the apartment, in the analogy, all the things that you want without having to lose anything off the side, whether that be relationships or, holistically the tray come crumbling down in some sort of massive anxiety attack or kind of retreating in a depression. And everybody's felt moments of this in their life where things just continue to pile on. It can feel overwhelming. You pick up a job, you have a second job, you're working on your side hustle, you're trying to get into a relationship. The relationship is struggling, there's stress at work, and all these things. There's some amount of it we can control, some amount of it we can't. But for the things that we can control and how we react to them, there are some tools and ways to negotiate that in a more efficient way, as well as in a way that is better for our own mental health. So that's kind of where I want to start, is talking about anxiety and in regards to becoming anxious over all the things that we have to do. I think the best way to start on anxiety is by defining what anxiety is. So anxiety is your body's response to your mind being focused on the future. You've probably heard that depression is your mind trapped in the past. You're focused on past events that are no longer there, whether that be a depressive episode after mourning a loss or being broken up with, etc. And then anxiety is kind of the opposite end of that spectrum, where your mind is constantly anxious and worried about the things that are to come. And an interesting thing about defining and understanding that anxiety is this future state awareness as opposed to being present, is that your physiological response, anxiety, meaning sweating, heightened heart rate, heightened rate of breathing, all these, the physiological component of anxiety is actually indistinguishable from feelings of excitement. And this is pretty cool and also important for us to know, meaning that both of those, being anxious and being excited, are your body understanding that your mind is ahead. Whether you're excited because exciting things are to come and you've decided that things are exciting, or you're very stressed and overwhelmed about the things that you need to get done that are in the future, deadlines, whatever, both of those responses are the same. Both times you're going to have a heightened heart rate, you're going to be breathing hard, your hands are going to be sweaty, and everybody's felt varying degrees of it. Some people have properly clinically diagnosed anxiety disorders and other people have tight windows of anxiety attacks. Me personally, I think that I am fortunate and speak from a place of somewhat of privilege, if you can call it, in that I don't have a tendency to be a very anxious person. I think part of that is genetically what I was given. I think there is a genetic component to it, but I also think that I have a very central, which I've worked to curate over the years, a pretty central locus of control, meaning that I view my life as entirely within my control, at least the things that I can. And I try actively to put all of my attention towards just those things, which decreases anxiety, right? Like the more present you are and the more in control you feel, the less anxious you will be. That being said, I have experienced, a handful, probably I can count on one hand, true anxiety attacks, and because it is uncommon to myself, I was very surprised when I remember the first one that ever happened. I was eating a dinner with my family just out at a restaurant, and completely out of my control and completely I couldn't mentally stop myself. I just started breathing really, really hard. Tears started to well up in my eyes, and I had to kind of dismiss myself and go to the restroom. And I remember I locked the stall and just sat on the toilet, crying and kind of shaking and breathing really hard. I tried doing breathing exercises to bring my heart rate down, and it took a bit. Eventually I came back to normal, but that overwhelming anxious feeling, I can definitely empathize with for those that have those types of episodes more frequently and or a heightened degree of those with kind of clinical anxiety attacks. So I understand the feeling well, and I think a way that I continue to mitigate and have not had one in a very long time is to make sure that, one, I'm always present in the moment, the only moment that I have control over can experience, right? Like I don't want to dwell in the past and fall into depression, but I also don't want to dwell tremendously in the future. And, obviously you need to plan for the future and have a plan of attack for the things that you want to accomplish and goals and things to aspire towards. But if all of your mental time is spent out ahead of yourself as the road is being built before it's there, you're going to feel completely out of your control, because the future, it's always running away from us. And so we're never really going to be able to grab it. And then that lack of control is where the anxiety comes in. And then the second part of that, kind of going back to the excitement versus anxiety thing, is understanding that it is a choice. Whether you decide the feeling of the future is one of excitement or one of anxiety. You can look at the things that are ahead of you and out of your control and say, I am excited about the prospect of experiencing those in the future. Or you can say, I am overwhelmed and anxious about the outcomes, which I obviously cannot control because I'm not there yet. And your body will react obviously in the same way. And one of those could be moments of really heightened positive emotion and you can feel excitement, or it could be a moment of an anxiety attack. And so understanding that you're totally in control of that and using your mind, you can take back your physiology. You can take back control over your body with your mind and win for yourself excitement over anxiety. So I think that's a pretty cool thing to understand, and something certainly I found interesting when I was like kind of researching what is anxiety and understanding and coming to learn that it is, physiologically indistinguishable, or at least very, very similar to excitement. So now we know, or at least we understand, that anxiety is this product of that which we can't control, this feeling of lack of control. So how do we bring control over our lives and with intentionality design our day-to-day, our routines, our habits, so that we feel less anxious on a regular basis and are also getting the desired outcomes that we want? Because both of those things are things that we want, right? Like we want to be able to say we want one thing and accomplish it, but we also want to, as we are going through the process of getting to those goals, feel in control and also utilize the underlying psychology and physiology of the human mind to get to a place where we can be most efficient at that. If we look at it from an evolutionary psychology perspective, we can understand and look at the fact that our brain is really good at and already does create automated routines in your life without you even knowing it. So whether you're sitting there and you think like, I've got my daily routine dialed, I've seen all these videos, Dr. Huberman, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, like, I've read all these things, I've read books, I've read studies, like I've got my morning routine perfect, I see daylight when I wake up, I drink salt water, like all this stuff. Or you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're just watching YouTube videos of like celebrity morning routines and you feel kind of lost, but you want to have that control of your life. Wherever on the spectrum you fall, whether you've designed your daily routine or you haven't, you have a daily routine. And if you just take a look at what you do in the day-to-day, you'll be surprised at how many things are consistent and unconscious. For instance, you didn't think about most likely this morning when you woke up, going to the bathroom and then proceeding to do things like brush your teeth or get ready for the day. I think the teeth brushing example is a great one that we can look at for habit building, because while for years, assuming you were an adult or a young adult, the teeth brushing, you don't think about it. You don't question whether you're going to do it day and night, whatever, however many times a day you do it. You don't think about it. You just do it at the time that you've programmed yourself to do it. But there was a time, if we wind back the clock, where your parent had to sit there and either brush your teeth for you or sit there and watch and make sure you did it. And some parents might have done a reward system. If you brush your teeth, you get blah or whatever. But there was a time where someone was essentially holding your hand to get you to brush your teeth every day. And so even the most mundane of routines need to be formed by some amount of force up front. But what's cool is once you do the work in the upfront, it becomes automated just like any other habit or routine. And it can be varying levels of degrees of effort and complexity. You think about brushing your teeth is pretty simple. You're already in the place where you're or close to the place where it is. It's in your bathroom. It's not a ton of physical exertion. It's not a ton of mental exertion, but we can look at a more complicated habit like I want to read every day or I want to go to the gym every day. Those require a lot more variables. You have to fit it into your schedule. You have to, if it's the gym, you have to exert physical effort on a consistent basis, put yourself in a place where you're uncomfortable. So these are definitely going to take a little bit more effort upfront. And if we look back to the toothbrushing example, what were the variables that came into that made you successful at making that habit in the first place? Well, one is you were not just accountable to yourself. Someone, parent, guardian, older sibling, whatever, somebody showed you how and then held you accountable to it until you started doing it, right? Like they were probably in the room for a good amount of time. And then every once in a while when you came back downstairs, oh, did you brush your teeth this morning? And then eventually they took the training wheels off and didn't have to ask you every day because they assumed and correctly assumed that you were doing it on your own for your own good because you understood not only the value of it, but you've made it part of your routine. So any single habit that you want to form, look at not only why you want to do it. I think a lot of people can agree, like, I want to be healthier. I want to have this diet. I want to have a training plan. I want to read, whatever your habit or goal. I want to work for an hour a day on my business. I want to do research for an hour a day, whatever the habit is. So what were the variables that made it successful? Well, outside of just brute forcing it and doing it every day, which is important, you are going to have to use your willpower. Having an external source of accountability is immense. So whether that be an accountability partner in one of your roommates or friends that you say, hey, I'm trying to start this new habit. Can you hold me accountable to it? Can you send me a text every day to see if I've done it or whatever? And you could provide that same kind of value back to them for whatever they want to do. Or you put yourself in a community or a space that's going to hold you accountable to it naturally, where you give weekly updates or whatever. I think about the program that I've built is exactly that, right? It's an environment for people to become the best version of themselves. For the thing that is respectively hard for you, you have a group to go back to and be accountable towards. So if for you already have the training thing dialed, but you've always wanted to read and you've had a hard time implementing that in your daily routine, let the group know when you fall short and they can hold you accountable. And having that back pressure and knowing that someone's watching will do amazing things for your ability to create habits. And so I think the toothbrushing example is a really good way to demonstrate that. So if you are looking to build habits into your daily routine, having an external source of accountability is a huge component of that. But to circle back to the psychology part of it all, the fact that you don't think about brushing your teeth every day is something that needs to be emphasized because it's pretty incredible. It means that you are doing something every single day, but the conscious decision-making part of it is completely switched off. And it is an automatic routine that you now have assumed. And the reason our brain is good at this and does this from like the evolutionary perspective is so that you can free up computational power in your brain and energy for the tasks that are unpredictable and difficult. So early man didn't want to be deciding every single day all of these little mundane, the stuff that is the day-to-day, but it needed to be ready to direct all of its hard decision-making if a threat of attack from another tribe, a predator, the hunt, things that take active work. And you can think of it for your daily life in, I want to be able to direct attention and make decisions at my workplace. That's the stuff that will give you new variables and you need to be able to react. But what you don't want to be using your willpower on and decision making is, what am I going to eat today? And am I going to eat healthy today? It should just not be a question. It just is your state of being. I eat healthy, or am I going to train today? And then having to decide every day, that's where people fail. And it's understandable. And I've been there because you're deciding. And there's a concept in psychology called decision-making fatigue, essentially understanding that like any other muscle, making decisions on a recurring basis fatigues you. And so the further down the chain you get, and you can think about it even in just a 24-hour window, in the morning you have very little decision-making fatigue, but by the end of the day, you've made a bunch of decisions, whether conscious or unconscious, and so you're very fatigued. So by the end of the day, you have a drained tank of willpower. It will be much harder to make decisions, and that's where you can and want to be able to fall back on a routine that is ideally beneficial to yourself and healthy. This is why we forget that we brush our teeth. This is why we forget what we ate for lunch if we eat the same kind of lunch on a consistent basis. But when things become variable, they'll stick out in our day. If someone new came into the office, or you had a meeting that didn't go so well or went really well, it's those things that stand out in our memory because they were points of decision making and points where we were making conscious attention or drawing conscious attention to it, as opposed to these unconscious habits. And so while we always want to work on being as present as possible, we do want to weaponize our subconscious and our psychology to help us get the things that we know we need to do on a daily basis, but we don't necessarily need to be as zen and meditative, like I am present in every moment. There are things you don't need to be present for every single moment, unless you're in a place where you have reached, nirvana on earth. And in which case I envy you, but I also have a hard time believing that you're currently a very productive member of society. No shade towards the monks in the audience, but I will say that it's a delicate balance, right? Like there are things you want to be extremely present with, like when you spend time with your friends, spending quiet meditative time alone with yourself. But things like, what am I going to eat for lunch today if I know I need to have a certain type of diet, or am I going to go to the gym? You don't need to be present in that decision. Quite frankly, it will be more healthy and beneficial to your life to just go and do it. And the act of doing it will yield all the benefit, as opposed to deciding every single day that you have to. Because that's really the difference between the people that go consistently or do the thing consistently, like the people that read every single day or whatever, those types of people versus the people that don't. It's just active versus passive and leveraging the two. The passive routine of the person who has created a habit out of the healthy things is just the healthy things. They are not even in the driver's seat necessarily. They are passively doing what's right. But it took a period of being active and forcing those habits into their life. And then the people that don't, their passive routine is coming home from work and turning the TV on, or every time you have a bit of free time, you just flip out your phone and passively scroll through TikTok for the quick dopamine hit. And all of those are not statements of condemnation, because I completely empathize with those. Like I fall victim to the phone being an addictive source. Like I've missed days in the gym, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, that's the difference. That is the only difference, is that like you take moments of effort and high energy, weaponize that active decision-making, use the willpower to force yourself to build the habit, use accountability sources, and then everything else is on autopilot. And it becomes this point where it's like, you don't even ask yourself, am I going to the gym? Like for me, I get back from work, and that's like my gym time. So I literally, like, I don't even think about it. I'll just like walk in, place my bike next to my desk, change out of my work clothes, change into my gym clothes, and I'm out the door. And I haven't even thought about it, honestly. It's just kind of the automatic routine. Then I come back, do dinner, whatever. But it took time to make that automatic. It wasn't always the case, right? I had to design, when is my gym time going to fit into my day? And we can even circle back to like the routines of the highly successful versus the routine of the lay person. The only difference is that one was designed and one just is, but the time, like the clock the globe continues to spin, the sun continues to ride, time continues to pass. So 24 hours will go, and how yours is spent is up to you. But if you don't choose it, it's still going to get spent. The day is going to go on. So designing your daily routine that is effective towards whatever your goals are, and maybe your goals aren't some sort of like high performance thing. You just want to be a better partner, a better father, a better family member, a better worker at work, a better monk. Whatever your goals are, you need to build the routine that sustains the goals and moves you closer to them, versus just assuming it'll happen or thinking about it willy-nilly, but not really taking any active steps towards it. One really quick thing I want to touch on with the habit making thing is, and also it kind of ties into the decision-making fatigue. There's kind of two schools of thought, and this is like a mental model or a bit of a trick you can use when you're looking at your task list for whatever day it is. Do you do the hard thing first, and then once you've done the hard thing, you're ready to knock out all the other smaller tasks? Or do you do a bunch of the small tasks that are easy wins to start building momentum and then roll into the day? I actually don't think that there is a right answer. I think it's case by case. I think I've heard the argument, read the argument, seen the data and information for both, and I have personally tried both, and I go back and forth, which is why I think that it totally is task dependent. But you need to assess, just take a moment and say like where your willpower is at. Like if it's early in the day and you're just starting your day, I think the best way to structure it for sure is do the hard thing first, the thing that's going to take the most mental attention. Like there's a ton of data to say that the most like mentally acute you're going to be is in the first 30 minutes after waking, and then the 3-hour period after that. And so if it's going to take a ton of mental focus and fatigue, do the hard thing first, and then the rest of the day can be coasting when you're more mentally fatigued. But if now you have a new task list, or your boss is like, hey, I need these things done by the end of day, and it's after your lunch break, take a step back and say like, okay, these are my things. This is the order I'm going to attack them in. And I actually want to put the easy stuff, like I'm really like not zoned in right now. I think of it like an on-ramp almost, where you use the task list of the little things like, okay, email Stacy, check. Update product order forms, check. Like the stuff that's going to be easy. And then you get into the complicated thing like build slide deck for massive end of month presentation. And like these are like boring work examples, but you can use it in your day-to-day life, or if you're building a company, whatever it is. Like there are the small menial tasks and everybody knows them, and administrative tasks exist and they will always exist. So until you're completely outsourcing them away from yourself and you have a varying degree of difficulty list of things to do, and you probably always will, you can use to get yourself into closer to like a flow state or a state of concentration. You can on-ramp with the stuff that isn't going to be too mentally focused, but you're kind of just like slowly and gently directing your mental attention towards center. And then you can roll into the larger and harder tasks once you've kind of like zened and flow stated your way into focus. Or the other way around, if you're starting your day, it's much easier to drop into that state if you do the hard thing first. And also, if you accomplish whatever the hardest thing of your day is before noon, one, you're going to feel extremely fulfilled, but two, like that day is already a win. Because if had you not done it before the halfway mark, there's a chance you don't do it because you're much more fatigued in the afternoon and, oh, I'll just take care of it tomorrow. And then you miss the day for whatever it was you were trying to accomplish that day. So those are the two sides of that coin. I think utilizing that, each one where you see fit and when you see applicable, is worth experimenting with. But those would be the two categories I would say, is like if you're coming to the task list at the beginning of the day or you're prepping for the next day with what you know you need to accomplish, try to schedule the hard things first, do the big thing, and then roll into the smaller tasks as you get more and more fatigued. But if you're at a midway point and new tasks appear and you feel like you're not super focused, maybe knock out the smaller things as a bit of a concentration on-ramp. That has been helpful for myself. And another thing is I want to circle back to the analogy that Grace used on closing the tabs of your mind and talk about multitasking. The concept of multitasking, I think most people know it by now, but your brain is not good and technically isn't actually even capable of doing multiple things at once. When people think that they're good at multitasking, their brain is just better at rapidly jumping between the two things. For instance, listening to a podcast and writing an email. You are not actually capable of understanding to a full 100% and writing the email with a full concentration at the same time. And like I'm as guilty as anyone else. Like I'll throw a podcast on at work when I'm doing the kind of brainless stuff, but I'd be lying to myself if I said I'm fully focused on the podcast, taking everything from it as if it was a lecture and also fully in the task. It's very much like a bouncing back and forth, kind of floating in and out. And typically you'll do the podcast when you're doing something that isn't as active or doesn't use the same side of your brain or whatever. But definitely don't try to convince yourself or fall into the school of thought where multitasking is somehow better. Our brains are actually extremely effective at focusing on one thing to a high degree of depth. So instead of trying to think, and this goes back to the anxiety thing, if you have 50 tasks to do at once and you're kind of piecemealing them, you're chipping away at each of the ones, you're wasting your time because the fatigue and also time spent on bouncing between the tasks, you're losing the time it takes to reconcentrate and refocus on each one. Instead, spend some time ahead of actually attacking them and put them in some sort of order, stratify them and say like, I'm going to do this task until it is complete. I'm going to do the next task until it's complete, and check them one at a time. Not only will this build momentum and excitement for the checking and all these other positive things, but you will waste less time in the in-between. And I think the cherry on top and the best part is that while you're doing it, you will be way less anxious because you're not thinking about the rest of the list when you're on one thing, because you know you're not going to touch the rest of the list until you do the thing that you're focusing on. And one of the single most transformative, and I still think about it, so this is probably one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received, and the fact that it came from another college kid is pretty remarkable to myself. So I came into college, went to Georgia Tech, extremely rigorous school. I would say it's probably in the US and maybe in the world, probably top 3 as far as academic rigor. Unfortunately, the student depression and suicide rate probably reflects that. However, great college experience, not lamenting it. But when I came from a very small private school, high school education, and then was dropped into the big pond, it was a huge adjustment of effort and rigor on my part, not only in individual difficulty, but in totality of tasks I was taking on. So I was super anxious my first semester, taking on a lot of stuff. I joined a fraternity, so you're doing all that, like the pledging. And I went to an older guy for some advice, and he was a fifth year at the time. So he was getting ready. He had studied aerospace engineering and was getting ready to go out into the real world. And so, he had some time to learn the hard lessons. And so the analogy he used, and the analogy has stuck with me because it's so, I don't know, it clicked for me, so I'll share it with you. And you can even actually do this physically to help you. But the analogy is this. Think of every single thing you have to do today. Like in college, he was kind of talking me through it. Like you have your math homework, you have your chemistry homework, you have your engineering 101 homework, you have to do this thing you have lacrosse practice later, you have all these things, right? Think of each one of those things as a piece of paper, and you have this massive stack of papers on your desk. And if the papers will continue to stack up and they're scattered and they're not organized neatly, and it's next to you and you see it and you're looking at the stack, that is anxiety. It is almost impossible, even for the strongest of wills, to not be present in the one thing you're trying to do when all you need to do is slightly lift your eyes off what piece of paper you're writing on, and Jesus, like, look at the stack of things I have to do today. So take some time at the beginning, whether this is the night before the next day or the morning time, whatever's most effective for you. Look at the tasks that you have to do for the day, neaten up the pile of papers, put the papers in a drawer in your desk, and then close that drawer. Reopen it, take one sheet of paper out and place it on your desk and work on it until it's done, and then put that sheet away, file it into the sent drawer, and then open the drawer again and take one sheet of paper out at a time. And I don't know what about this analogy clicked. Maybe it speaks to like the way my cognition is in some sort of visual space, but the idea of just one thing at a time changed kind of everything for me. And I felt like the rest of college, after I learned to kind of implement that into practice, was way, way, way less stressful. It didn't necessarily get easier. It still took time to get better at the things that I was doing, the actual classes and whatever other tasks I was doing. And life will not magically get easier for you. Tasks in life are harder or they're not, but the ability to handle a higher load and volume of things as you're trying to take more things on and suck the marrow out of life and like really go at it, which I completely endorse. Like taking on more than you can handle, trying to really expand yourself, I fully advocate, and it's a life I try to live. You should be pushing yourself to where you feel like you can't do it anymore. Like that is the best way to live, because the alternative is complacency and boredom. And anyone who's ever done that, it may be nice to like rest on your laurels for a little bit, but you can't vacation forever. Something in our mind drives us to accomplishment, drives us to be a productive force while we are here and alive. What version of productivity that is for you is totally individual. It could be create music, create art, start a family, raise children, start a business, be wildly successful in that business, speak to people, write, whatever. The opportunity to be a creative force is unlimited, but it is undeniable that something inside of us wants to be that creative force. And so knowing that, we will take on things in our life to be that for ourselves, for other people. And these different things take up space in our mind. They add to the pile on the desk. And reasonably, even very stoic, strong-minded people can be overwhelmed at any amount of time when the stack gets too high. So stop looking at it, put it in the drawer, and say, I'm just going to take one sheet out at a time, and I'm going to work on it until it's done, and that's it. For me, that was an analogy that really changed a lot, so I hope it does the same for those listening. I think to close out, I'll try to do like a little rapid fire for tips and tricks that I've either adopted or experimented with that make my day more effective and present and efficient and all these other things. I'm no master of productivity. My mind wanders like everyone else. I still spend way too much time on my phone, but these are some things that I think can be helpful. So to touch on that immediately, and I've touched on this in other episodes of the podcast. I think it was episode 2, maybe. There was some episode where I talked about creation and consumption and cleaning up your social media consumption habits, but that's a huge one. It's a place where almost every single person is wasting time. You can think of it like holes in a boat. Everyone's taking on water. It's just a degree of how much water per minute. So unless you're going to completely rid yourself of technology and social media, which is relatively impractical in our interconnected age. Mitigating the waste is super important. So one thing is deleting the super wasteful apps. So things that are just completely not serving you. Unless you're a business person or entrepreneur, delete TikTok. Its algorithm is too good. It will take time of your day. And you can look at the usage on your phone, look at the time screen per week, per day. It's going to surprise you and probably shock you. That is free time you can win back. So delete TikTok, Snapchats. If you can get over leaving the Snap groups, I somewhat more recently deleted it. Haven't felt like I've lost anything. The people that matter in your life, you're going to text and call anyway. So rip the Band-Aid. That'll save you some time. Instagram, I've talked on this before, and I encourage you to go back and listen. But there's ways to kind of eliminate. You can mute people's stories and posts if you don't want to see them without unfollowing them. Also encourage you to unfollow accounts that aren't super productive and or post super frequently. I've go more in depth in this into like actually how to do it in another episode. So I encourage you to go back and listen. Episode 9, it was episode 9. So if you want to go back, listen to episode 9, I provide some more detail on that. So that's kind of a big thing to just win back some time, waste a little bit less of it during the day is the social media stuff. And you can take the time if you want to go back and listen. And I talk about actual like step-by-step kind of stuff. So that's 1. 2 is have a checklist for each day. And the best that I've found is doing it the night before. Oftentimes mornings and evenings are moments of relative stillness. For whatever reason, time it should be unilaterally experienced the same, but something about the hours of the early morning and the hours before you go to bed, there's like a quietness and a peacefulness. And I think there's like an energetic side of that, but then there's also the practical side as people are going to be awake and asleep. So taking some time the night before, or like worst case scenario, doing it the morning of every day when you have some quiet time to yourself and planning out the tasks that you need to do for the next day, or at least writing it all down, will decrease the anxiety, because now instead of this just floating in your mind, oh, I need to remember to email so-and-so and pick up this one thing from the store and do blah, blah, blah. All of those things are just floating in your head. It's wasted mental real estate. It's going to make you anxious. It's going to be looking at that pile of paper. So instead, prioritize. You can not only write them down, but you can prioritize them based on how you want to attack it, whether it's the big thing first or the little things to build momentum. You do you. I encourage you to experiment, but take some time the night before, write down the things that you want to do the next day. And there's, again, 2 kind of schools of thought. I've gone back and forth, and I don't know that there's one right way or the other. One is write down all the little tasks that you want. If you're like a really goal-oriented person, this can be awesome because you get to do a lot of checks on the piece of paper. And this is a great way to like build habits, momentum, excitement, and maintain momentum throughout the day because you're just continue to check those boxes. Or you can be much more reductive and write down the 1 to 3 big things that you want to do that day. And those are the only things that you work on and the only things you write down. That can be also really powerful because 1, they're huge wins when you get them done, but 2, you're very clear and focused on what you need to do. You can think of it as if instead of putting a bunch of papers in the drawer and going one at a time, you just throw away everything except for 3 really, really important, and maybe they're not paper, maybe you staple them in groups and they're reports instead of just single papers, but there's only 3 things on your desk or in your drawer. And so, you can kind of check those larger task items off. Another good one is at the end of the day, when you're prepping for the next day, you can ask yourself, and this came to me originally from reading and studying daily routines in general of successful people, but specifically Benjamin Franklin. He had this thing that he called the powerful goodness. And his powerful goodness would be starting every single day and then ending every single day with a question to himself. So you start every single day with, what good shall I do this day? And you end every day with, what good did I do this day? I think this is really cool, and you can tailor it as more emotionally and spiritually or practical and productive as you want. But you can think of it like, what good do I do for others and like the world at large? And then did I accomplish that at the end of the day? Or it can be like, what is my main task for today? Like, what is the big thing? And did I do it? I've kind of adapted it slightly differently in that I'll start the day to get like a positive energy with gratitudes, like 3 daily gratitudes, things that I'm grateful for, put you in that good state of mind. Highly encourage that practice as well. And then I end every day and I ask myself the question, did I do my best today? It's a pretty powerful question because 1, you are almost never going to be able to say yes honestly with yourself. And because you're writing it down and you're speaking with yourself, you can be candid. You don't have anything to prove to anyone. And the more honest you are with yourself, the better it will serve you. You get to the end of the day and you say, did I do my best today? And almost always you're going to write down no, and that's okay. But when you write down no, you follow it up with why, and then you actually get to write down what you think was the thing that tripped you that day. So did I do my best is broad, and you can think about it in a lot of different aspects, but my best, and you know what your best is capable of, and you're only capable of at most your best. If I took a little cheat meal or whatever, or like had the dessert when I knew I shouldn't have, or I skipped my workout because I was tired, or I didn't call that person I've been meaning to call because I got busy, or whatever excuse I made at the time, or you can think of a million different things that you didn't do that day that would have constituted your best. And it doesn't mean like some sort of like pinnacle of unrelenting perfection in your daily routine. It just means the best that you're capable of each day. You know, it's unrealistic to think that like, did I do my best today? No, because I didn't make $1 million today. Well, unless you have businesses and processes that would have been your best, that's not part of your best as of right now. You know, you don't have to hold yourself to a standard of like, did I make $1 million, or did I run a marathon today? Like that's not part of your best, but your best would be giving your best effort, showing up to the gym and doing exactly what you told yourself you were going to do, sticking to the diet plan that you told yourself you're going to stick to, calling the person you told yourself you were going to call, checking off the boxes that you wrote down last night. If not all those boxes are checked by the end of the day, you didn't do your best. And that's okay. But which box is missing? Why did you miss it? And what's cool about answering those is you'll probably, and I've experienced, you'll start to see a pattern of like things and reasons you're slipping up, like both in type and causality. And then you can really direct your attention to fixing those things. And you can say, consistently, I am going over my calorie limit at dinner. Well, why? It's because you're decision-making fatigue. You get cravings late at night. So you can make the adjustments, and we don't have to go into a nutrition episode right now, but that could be one thing. Or you always put off calling your parents or grandparents because you get wrapped up in the busyness of work, but you know you should. Like if it's something you know you should do, then you should do it. So make some time, like whether it be call them while you're on your lunch break, or call them super early in the morning before your boss gets in, or take a 10-minute walk during the middle of the day and give them a quick call. Figuring out where you can do the task in the least invasive way possible to your, daily routine that you're trying to build with all these habits that we talked about. Do it. And you'll get to see that by asking yourself every single day and really take a stab at making that fix. To go back to the willpower thing, make sure that whatever the hardest thing is for you, whether it's like, I really have a hard time going to the gym, or I really have a hard time sticking to my diet, or I have a really hard time reading, or I blah, 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 whatever it is, whatever the thing that is the most difficult, try your best to get it done in the front half of the day. It's hard always to put it like literally when you wake up, because you may not want to train, or it may not be feasible for you to train right in the morning, or you don't have enough time to read before work, or whatever it is. But if you do it on the front half of the day, like I said, one, it guarantees you that you won the day before noon. That's huge. And two, way less decision-making fatigue is going to be in your way, in between you and accomplishing the thing that you want to do. So whatever it is that is hard for you to do and you want to be part of your habit or routine, put it at the front. And so I guess that's me picking a side between the small tasks to build to the hard one. Like I'm going to take a hard stance on whatever habit is you're trying to build, like more of like a lifestyle type thing. Do it in the front half, and then it will become habit, and then you can move it around in your day wherever you see fit. Another more broad statement on this like habit and routine thing is experiment. Don't hold yourself. Don't create this idea of a perfect routine or find something on YouTube that you want to emulate. There's a ton of those videos, like Nathaniel Drew, love his videos, but he's done like day in the life acting like Leonardo da Vinci, or day in the life acting like blah, blah, blah. And like the day in life routine, I find it super fascinating to see what really successful people live like on their day-to-day, and you can draw inspiration from it, but you are 100% you, and not like anyone else. So what works for you fundamentally will be different than every other single person, at least to some level of minutia. So take the time to experiment. Try just adding one new thing to your daily routine. Be generous and forgiving with yourself when you slip up, and then don't feel the need to be 100% tied to what you decide to do. Your routine can shift and change in the seasons and days of your life that require different things. Like, I'm not kidding myself, or I would be kidding myself if I thought that the routine as this up and coming, high energy, 23-year-old kid, aspiring business owner, all this stuff is going to be exactly the same as when I'm 33, 34, 35 and have kids, or 45 and have kids, or whatever, right? Like, my daily routine will and does change. It's changed from 6 months ago to now. It'll change 6 years into the future. So that is okay. And the important thing is that whatever your routine is it's one you chose, not just my brain will find routines. So the way I spend every day is just how I spend the days now. That is objectively the wrong way to do it, because you didn't choose it, and it can't be satisfying to you if you didn't at least have some say. There are things that program people to some sort of routine, and they can be good for showing you what the power of diligence is. And these things that I'm thinking of, I guess to describe explicitly, would be like sports teams, military, any sort of organization that you join that has daily requirements. Those things can show you the power of discipline and routine, but we often see, especially within athletics, like people that leave college athletics and struggle to make it pro, or even readjust to adult life, they become like super out of shape. I mean, military is a great example. People are in super peak shape when they're in training, and then they get in the reserves and or step away from military service, and they blow up, and now they're part of the common everyday American person with high blood pressure, and they're 70 pounds overweight. It's like, where did the military discipline go? Well, the discipline wasn't in the person, it was in the structure. So understand that you need to choose it for yourself. And those things can show you what the power of discipline is, but you need to adopt it for yourself. Adopt the discipline of building your own routine. Build it for yourself. Choose the day-to-day, and you'll be rewarded for it. So I think that's the end of what I wanted to talk about today. I hope it was helpful. I hope it wasn't too sporadic. I know I kind of bounced all over the place. I don't have any sources directly to cite, but as far as the evolutionary psychology stuff, resources that I like to go to, if you find that stuff fascinating, is a podcast called Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. I've been listening to a few of those recently. He has really fascinating guests, and he's pretty fascinated in the topic, so often is discussed in various forms, as well as the Dr. Huberman podcast. He's a neuroscientist out of Stanford, talks a lot about the neuroscience behind, quite frankly, everything. And so there's a lot of really cool information on his podcast, but he's done stuff on habits, routine building, morning routine, all this kind of stuff. So if you're looking for like proper data-backed optimization, that's a great place to go to. I'm not going to feign neuroscience knowledge on this podcast. I'm just going to kind of talk about my experience and what's worked for me and what I know works for other people, and some of the same stuff that I talk about in my program with the guys that are in it. If that stuff sounds interesting to you, please go check their stuff out. If you found what I've said today interesting, please go back and listen to other episodes. Like I said, episode 9, I talked about the social media content consumption, and I no doubt it will be a topic I can talk about into the future because I think it's so important. But thank you for listening today. As always, you can follow along the program that I'm working on, as well as the podcast clips and highlights and stuff like that, on Instagram at Vitruvian Gentleman. You can follow myself at ZDSCHENKEN. Thank you to Grace for the topic for this week. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, please DM me your thoughts. Also, if you want to hear me talk about anything in specific, please let me know. And if the things that I mentioned and the accountability, the external accountability, is something that you're looking to build, and you're a man looking to become the best version of himself and spend some time and make the investment and make the leap into becoming that best version, please message me. It's exactly the program that I have built, and I know it can have an impact in your life. I would be excited to hear about your story and whether you would be a good fit. I'm hoping to start opening slots soon for the waitlist for class 2. Currently 4 weeks in with the first class, and it's going awesome. I'm seeing excellent progress with the guys, and they're enjoying it. So would love to meet the next class of Vitruvian men. So message me if that is you or you think it could be. Other than that, thank you so much for listening to the end. You mean the world to me. Share with somebody, just one person that you think might find value from it, because it is a great way to provide value. This is something I'm going to talk about most likely next week. I made a post on my story today about, I just reread How to Win Friends and Influence People, but it's important to water the relationships you do have. And a great way to do so that is no cost to you, but can provide a lot of value for others, is share things you find meaningful. So if that podcast is that, then share it. If it's an episode of Dr. Huberman's podcast, share that. But provide value to those that are around you. It will reap great rewards in your life. But that is enough rambling for today. Thank you for spending all this time with me. Remember, your time is your most valuable resource. So thank you so much for spending a little bit of it with me. Memento Mori, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Vitruvian Man podcast.
And if he at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.